There is a predictable life cycle that organisms follow. Each animal, whether vertebrate or invertebrate, passes through similar stages of development, though obviously not all of these stages occur in all animals. These stages are fertilization, cleavage, gastrulation, organogenesis, birth, larval stages and metamorphosis, which are seen in some species, and gametogenesis. And the stages of development that occur between fertilization and hatching or birth are collectively called embryogenesis. In order to review the major events of each of these stages, we'll use the frog as an example. And we'll begin by discussing fertilization, which serves two purposes. Obviously, the creation of a new organism or reproduction, and genetic recombination, since there is both the merging of the sperm and the egg, and also because each of these has different combinations of alleles as a result of the genetic recombination that happens during meiosis. As you know, fertilization involves the fusion of gametes. And I should point out that the sperm and egg that are shown in these pictures are from sea urchin, not frogs. When the sperm enters the egg, the nuclei of the gametes, which are known as pronuclei, fuse. It's also important to point out that in some organisms, like amphibians, the entry of the sperm influences where the different axes of the body will form. In frogs, for example, where the sperm enters becomes the belly of the embryo. Another effect of sperm entry, which occurs in most species, is the activation of the egg's metabolism, which is needed to begin the process of development. The fusion of the sperm and the egg and of the male and female pronuclei is followed by cleavage, which refers to rapid cell division. In order for a new organism to develop from the zygote, there obviously have to be many cell divisions. These divisions happen very quickly, and in the frog, the divisions are remarkably fast because the cell cycle is modified so that the two growth phases, G1 and G2, are actually skipped. Since growth is not happening between cell divisions, the volume of the zygote remains the same as it undergoes cleavage. And because of this, the volume is actually being divided into smaller and smaller cells. Each of these cells is known as a blastomere. And by the end of this process, the organism is known as a blastula, which consists of a sphere of cells that surrounds a fluid-filled cavity known as the blastocele. The next stage after cleavage is gastrulation, and this is the stage during which the three germ layers, the ectoderm, the mesoderm, and the endoderm, are formed. This stage is characterized by extensive cell movements and changes in cell shape. At this stage, cells that will give rise to the internal organs are brought into the interior of the embryo. Once the three germ layers are segregated, the next stage is organogenesis, and as the name suggests, this is the stage during which tissues and organs are formed. The first thing that occurs is a process that's known as neurulation, which results in the formation of the nervous system as the ectoderm is brought into the embryo to form the neural tube. The neural tube will eventually give rise to the brain and the spinal cord. This process, like other processes that occur during organogenesis, requires communication among neighboring cells. So the formation of the nervous system requires signals that comes from other tissues. In this case, a rod of mesoderm that's known as the notochord secretes signals that induce the ectoderm above it to form the neural tube that will form the brain and spinal cord. As the organism continues to develop, it lengthens and the mouth and anus are formed. Eventually, a larva emerges. The larval stage, which is present in some organisms, has two primary purposes. Those are feeding and dispersal. Organisms like frogs, whose eggs do not have as much yolk as those of birds, and which do not develop internally like mammals, typically have larval stages. So this stage is going to allow this organism to accumulate the energy that it's going to need to reproduce. In some cases, the larval stage is very critical because they're actually organisms that are unable to feed as adults. The larva also allows the organism to move to a new environment before it reaches sexual maturity, which in frogs and other organisms occurs through the process of metamorphosis. Metamorphosis is accompanied by obvious changes. For example, in the frog, as you know, the tail is greatly reduced while the limbs emerge. But there are also changes that we don't see. The larva is an herbivore, but the adult is a carnivore. So the mouth parts and the intestines change as well during metamorphosis. Metamorphosis happens prior to the completion of the next stage. And the next stage is gametogenesis, which refers to the production of germ cells, the sperm and the egg. Although gametogenesis is completed when an organism becomes sexually mature, so during adulthood, it begins during embryonic development when the germ cells, the sperm and the egg, are set aside. And this stage can take a long time, even years, to be completed because it requires these germ cells to become competent or able to complete meiosis.